But I would like to highlight a very important bill that I'm working with my colleague, Congressman Bruce Braley from the state of Iowa. I'd like to urge my colleagues to take the time to look at this important measure. It's H.R. 5167, the Justice for Victims of Torture and Terrorism Act. I'm hopeful that when we are back here in November, and we will be back here on the 17th doing business, we'll be able to pass this bill and send it to the President for his signature. Let me just highlight some of the bill's most important aspects. H.R. 5167 will finally provide justice for American prisoners of war and civilians who were taken hostage and tortured by Saddam Hussein's regime. These victims include 17 American prisoners of war who were tortured under Saddam Hussein's regime, and they sought compensation through the courts. These victims also include CBS reporter Bob Simon and his cameraman Roberto Alvarez, who were captured and tortured along with the POWs. These brave POWs were beaten and starved by Saddam Hussein's regime, and they were awarded compensation from a U.S. judge until the Bush administration lawyers intervened in the case and said it should be thrown out. These victims were again denied justice by the Bush administration when President Bush vetoed H.R. 1585, the fiscal year 2008 National Defense Authorization Act, which would have allowed Americans tortured by Saddam Hussein's regime to pursue justice in U.S. courts. This bill, H.R. 5167, is a result of a bipartisan compromise. It passed the House unanimously on September 15th. The bill gives the government of Iraq 90 days to resolve the claims of American victims of Iraqi torture and terrorism for minimal amounts before the waiver that was put into last year's DoD bill would be terminated. As a result of the bipartisan compromise made in the House, the waiver would remain in place as long as the President certifies that Iraq has not settled commercial claims. The administration is engaged in good faith negotiation with Iraq to settle the claims of the victims. Let me point out, the compensation due these victims would not be U.S. taxpayer money, but coming from the Iraqi treasury. It's time that these victims are compensated. This bill would allow that to happen. And Mr. President, right now, the Iraqi government is depositing billions of dollars in U.S. banks here in the U.S. and billions in other places around the world. Surely, they can help compensate the 17 American prisoners of war and others who were tortured and beaten under Saddam Hussein. So again, as I pointed out, passed the House unanimously. I urge my colleagues to take a look at this bill. I'm hopeful that when we come back in November, that we can take it up and pass it unanimously, just like they did in the House. That, Mr. President, again, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.